I built an entire empire thinking about the two of us. $1 million companies, mansions, luxury cars, international trips, and a life few can even imagine. I believed that money, power, and stability would be enough to protect a marriage. But I was wrong. Because while I was building a real legacy, she chose to destroy everything for a man with no future, no assets, and nothing to lose. And the cruelest part was not the betrayal itself. It was realizing that, for some people, loyalty is worth less than momentary attention. This is not just the story of a betrayed millionaire husband. It is the story of how someone can trade security for illusion. Of how luxury can blind. And of how regret always arrives, when it is already too late. And if you think this story ends in suffering, you are mistaken. Because the real plot twist comes after the fall. When the one who was betrayed stops begging, and starts winning for real. Stay with me until the end, because the conclusion of this story proves that those who laugh last, laugh best. And if you like real stories of betrayal, luxury, power, karma, and epic twists, subscribe to the channel now, because here you will always see the game turn around. I was only 25 when money stopped being a distant dream and became routine. While many were still trying to figure out their own careers, I was already signing contracts that changed the course of entire companies. My name circulated in closed rooms, board meetings, and discussions where every decision involved millions. I was a CEO, founder, strategist, and responsible for numbers that intimidated even older, more experienced people. Luxury cars were not achievements, they were everyday tools. Mansions were not displays of wealth, they were refuges after weeks crossing time zones. My life was made of airports, five-star hotels, and international calls. The world saw me as someone untouchable, almost too cold to feel. But inside, I was still just a man wanting to share all of this with someone. I believed success only made sense when it was shared. I built every cent with obsessive discipline and a vision few understood in the beginning. While others spent, I reinvested. While others slept, I studied markets, numbers, and global opportunities. My companies grew fast because I was not afraid of difficult decisions. Money started working for me long before I turned 25. Funds, real estate, equity stakes, and assets accumulated in silence. I inherited nothing, received no shortcuts, had no sponsors. Everything was built through strategy, pressure, and sleepless nights. That gave me power but also enormous responsibility, and I wanted someone by my side to live it with me. To those on the outside, my life looked like a flawless luxury film. Dinners with international investors, private parties, events few were allowed to attend. I wore designer suits, but I never let ego dictate my choices. Money was always a tool to me, not an identity. I believed character mattered more than status. That loyalty was rarer than any imported car. Even surrounded by interest, I searched for real connection. I did not want someone impressed by my bank balance. I wanted someone who would grow with me, not compete with me, and it was in that emotional space that she entered. When I met her, I did not talk about companies or assets. I talked about plans, vision, and the future. She seemed to see beyond the money, or at least that was what she showed. She was intelligent, elegant, and knew how to move among influential people. I thought I had finally found someone who understood the game. Someone who could handle pressure, luxury, and exposure. Someone who would stand by me when the spotlight faded. I did not see risk, I saw partnership. And maybe that was my first mistake. Because misplaced trust is expensive. My routine was intense, but there was always space for the two of us. Even with full schedules, I made a point of being present. Business trips turned into shared experiences. Meetings in other cities ended with exclusive dinners. I believed balance was possible when there was intention. And I intended to build something solid. Nothing felt excessive when the goal was strengthening the relationship. I thought long-term, as I always did in business. Love to me was a serious investment. And I was willing to bet high. As my companies grew, my desire for emotional stability grew as well. I wanted to come home and feel peace, not competition. I wanted someone who took pride in what we built together. Even knowing the world revolves around money, I sought emotional simplicity. I believed financial success did not need to destroy relationships. That wealth and affection could coexist. That luxury did not have to create distance between two people. I was convinced I had everything under control. Companies, assets, future, and marriage. Little did I know that some things collapse in silence. Power taught me how to read numbers, but not hidden feelings. I analyzed charts with surgical precision. But ignored small changes that never appeared on spreadsheets. I believed that, just like in business, effort would fix everything. If something was wrong, I would compensate with presence and care. I did not see clear signs, only faint shadows. And shadows, to someone used to big decisions, seemed irrelevant. I moved forward confidently, advancing, building, without realizing that not everything grows together. Some things only pretend to keep up. At that moment in my life I felt invincible, not out of arrogance but because of results. Everything I touched seemed to prosper. Every calculated risk brought returns. Every difficult decision generated growth. That I believed this applied to love as well. That dedication always wins, that those who build empires know how to build relationships. And it was with that certainty that I moved forward, without imagining the price that belief would demand. The world saw me as an early winner, but no one saw how much I trusted the wrong people. That I believed I was at the peak of my story, when in reality I was only at the beginning of the conflict. Something was already moving beyond my control, something that did not appear in financial reports, something that did not respond to business logic. And while I celebrated external achievements, a silent crack was growing inside my own marriage. And that would change everything in the next chapter. When we got married, it seemed that everything around us confirmed we were the ideal couple. Photos circulated among business owners, investors, and influential people. Gala events began treating us as mandatory guests. She walked into chandelier-lit halls arm in arm with me, designer dresses, discreet jewelry, and carefully rehearsed smiles that I watched as everyone looked at us with silent admiration. To the world, we were financial success and love in perfect alignment. A young millionaire CEO and his impeccable wife. Everything looked solid, elegant, and enviable. But perfection is rarely as simple as it seems. She adapted quickly to the world of the elite. She learned how to behave at dinners with investors. She knew exactly when to smile and when to remain silent. She spoke about international travel as if it had always been part of her life. She moved through five-star hotels with ease. That I felt proud watching her, feel confident in that environment. That I believed she felt part of the construction. That she saw that world as ours. That she understood the value of what we were building together. And maybe I confused adaptation with connection. Our routine became marked by high-level social commitments. Private cocktails, exclusive parties, business launches. There was always expensive champagne, strategic conversations, and controlled laughter. She seemed to enjoy that scene more and more. That I liked seeing her elegant by my side. But I began to notice something subtle in her eyes. That a different sparkle when the topic was status. That an exaggerated attention to those with visibility. As if the stage mattered more than the backstage. And I started to ignore that detail. At home, everything still seemed to work. Silent mansions, absolute comfort, total security, staff, cars at our disposal, and a life without limits. But the atmosphere between us was no longer the same. Conversations started to grow shorter. Touch became less frequent. Interest more selective. I attributed it to fatigue, to the intense routine. I believed it was just a phase. Like so many others I had already overcome in business. She began to care too much about external appearance. Not just beauty but social perception. She asked who would be at certain events. Compared lifestyles, trips, and invitations. I listened, but did not absorb the warning. To me, it still seemed harmless. After all, we were surrounded by real luxury. Nothing was missing financially. I believed that was enough. And that belief was starting to cost me dearly. To those watching from the outside, we were a dream couple. Discreet posts, perfect images, striking presence. No public arguments, no scandals. Everything clean, organized, elegant. People commented on our chemistry. On how aligned we seemed. On how money had not changed our essence. They had no idea that distance makes no noise. That it grows in silence, in small details. And when it becomes visible, it is already too late. I tried to compensate for any distance with more attention. More trips, more exclusive experiences. Reserved restaurants, unexpected international destinations. I believed moments created bonds. That comfort brought emotional security. That showing care would fix any crack. But some people no longer want care. They want comparison, validation, and constant admiration. And I had not yet realized that. Even while surrounded by signs. The marriage began to function like a showcase. Perfect on the outside, empty in some corners on the inside. She smiled in public, but went silent in private. I talked about the future. She talked about the present. I thought about growth. She thought about visibility. Priorities began to reveal themselves as different. But I still insisted on seeing unity. Because admitting the flaw meant questioning everything. And I was not ready for that. Not yet. At that moment I thought our marriage was solid. That any small flaw was just fine-tuning. I trusted because I had always trusted processes. But relationships do not follow business logic. They do not respond to proportional investment. They do not grow only with resources. And while I strengthened the empire, something inside her began to look for something else. Something that was not in the numbers. Something that would open space for the next mistake. I still believed love was intact, even with invisible cracks. Even with subtle signs ignored that I kept moving forward, confident. Not knowing that someone was already watching everything from the outside. Someone who built nothing, but knew exactly what to promise. And the next chapter of my story begins there, when a third presence enters the scene, and completely changes the game. I always believed that love is also shown through practical care. To me, protecting meant guaranteeing comfort, stability, and financial freedom. That I wanted her to never have to worry about limits. No limit cards, bills paid before they were even due. Choices made without looking at the price, because I could and because I wanted to. Money was never scarce in my life. And I believed sharing it was a way of loving. I spared no effort when it came to her. Neither financial nor emotional. Designer clothes began arriving as something natural. Exclusive dresses, coveted handbags, custom-made shoes. Not as empty display, but as an expression of care. I watched the sparkle in her eyes as she opened each box. I saw satisfaction, pride, a sense of belonging. That made me feel I was on the right path. That I was fulfilling my role as a man and husband. That financial success also meant providing unique experiences. I wanted her to feel special every single day. Even when I was far away in some negotiation. Imported cars entered the garage as an extension of routine. Rare models, silent, powerful. Not to impress others, but to make her life easier. A driver at her disposal, absolute comfort, total security. I thought about every detail, from the route to the feeling of control. Because money to me was always about mastering one's own time. And I wanted her to have that mastery too. To never depend on anyone beyond us. That was how I understood partnership. Travel became part of our emotional calendar. Paris, Milan, Dubai, New York. 5-star hotels, private experiences, restricted access. Nothing was ordinary, everything was exclusive. I made a point of turning work intervals into memories. Even when the reason for the trip was business. I believed sharing the world would strengthen the relationship. That living the best of life together would create deep bonds. But experiences do not guarantee connection. And I did not fully understand that yet. Luxury gyms, international spas, exclusive treatments. I wanted her to feel cared for, admired, and valued. There were no limits when it came to well-being. Everything she mentioned, I provided. Everything she desired, I made possible. I confused absence with compensation. I thought the more I gave, the safer she would feel. But security is not built with resources alone. It requires real emotional presence. And that was starting to fade without me noticing. I truly believed I was doing everything right. That any woman would feel loved in that position. I did not see excess. I saw care. I did not see imbalance. I saw dedication. My logic was always clear. Effort generates results. But love does not work like a company. It does not respond to proportional investment. It does not grow only through material giving. And a silent asymmetry was beginning there. I was giving more than I received, without noticing. She began to accept everything as obligation, not as a gesture. Luxury stopped being a surprise and became an expectation. Comfort turned into the standard. And when the standard is not recognized, it becomes a demand. I felt this in small phrases. Subtle comparisons. Requests that no longer came with gratitude, but with disguised entitlement. Even so, I kept giving. Because I believed love was persistence. To me, money had always been a consequence of discipline. But to her, it was starting to become identity. I saw assets. She saw a showcase. I thought about sustainable growth. She thought about image, and that difference began to weigh heavily. Even when it was not spoken out loud. I was still blinded by the desire to please, without realizing the game had changed. The more I gave, the more distant she seemed to become. That confused me deeply. I did not understand how someone could feel empty surrounded by everything. But not everything fills. Some things only distract. And while I believed I was strengthening the relationship, I was feeding a desire with no bottom. Something that always demanded more external attention, more validation, more comparison. And that would open the door to something worse. I still thought the problem was lack of time, that it was enough to adjust the schedule, balance priorities. I did not see a threat. I only saw wear and tear. And wear and tear in my mind is solved with effort. But there was someone watching from the outside. Someone who did not need to build anything, just appear at the right moment. And the next part begins when this figure emerges, ready to exploit exactly that opening. Even surrounded by everything money could buy, something in her began to change. It did not happen all at once. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. Small comments, loose comparisons, silences that lasted too long. Nothing explicit, nothing that could turn into an argument. It was like a shadow moving through the house without making a sound. I noticed it, but I did not understand it, because, rationally, there was no reason at all. Life was comfortable, safe and full of privileges. But comfort does not prevent emptiness, and I began to feel it in the air. She started to get bored easily, activities that once excited her became mundane. International trips lost their charm too quickly, exclusive restaurants no longer impressed. Luxury turned into scenery, and when everything becomes scenery, comparison is born. She commented about other people, other lifestyles. Always someone more seen, more talked about, more admired. It was not about money. It was about attention. I tried to compensate with presents. I canceled meetings, adjusted schedules, moved flights forward. But even when I was there, I felt distance. She was physically present, emotionally absent. Her phone began to receive more attention than our conversations. Social media became her mood thermometer. Likes seemed to carry more weight than words, and I began to lose space without realizing it. Not to someone specific, but to a constant need for validation. Complaints always came disguised. Nothing direct, nothing that could be confronted. It was always something like, "I don't know, I feel like something is missing." Or, "Sometimes everything feels the same." I listened and tried to fix it, because solving problems had always been my strength. But that problem had no clear shape. It was emotional, subjective, unstable, and that took me out of control, something I was not used to feeling. She began to notice other men more, not in an obvious way but perceptibly, subtle compliments, light comparisons, casual remarks that I pretended not to notice, maybe out of pride, maybe out of excessive confidence that I believed nothing threatened what we had built. After all, I provided everything, but providing is not the same as being desired, and that detail began to haunt me. Money, which once symbolized security, became invisible. It no longer impressed. It no longer generated admiration. It was as if it had lost emotional value, and that confused me deeply, because it was with it that we built everything. Companies, assets, lifestyle. I could not understand how that could not be enough. But some people do not want a foundation, they want a stage. She began to frequent different environments, still within the elite but with another focus. More exposure, more image, more people watching. Events where appearance mattered more than substance. I did not see a problem at first. After all, they were part of our social circle. But the energy was different. Less deep conversation, more superficial exchange, less building, more display, and that began to shape her behavior. I felt something slipping through the cracks, but I could not point to exactly what it was. It was like a company starting to lose efficiency. No sudden drop, just slow erosion. Results still good, but processes failing. I tried to adjust, align, talk. But I always met vague answers. Nothing concrete, nothing admitted, just a constant sense of dissatisfaction, that did not come from outside, it came from within. Silence began to speak louder than words. Moments together became mechanical. Forced laughter, short dialogues, selective interest. I felt that I was not competing with anyone specific. I was competing with an idea. The idea that something better existed somewhere else. Something more exciting, more admired, more talked about. And that is dangerous. Because when someone looks outside for what they do not understand inside, they become vulnerable to any empty promise. I still believed it was just a phase, that every relationship goes through adjustments, that patience and dedication would be enough. I did not see a real threat. There was no name, there was no face, but there was space, and emotional space never stays empty for long. Someone always fills it, even if they arrive smiling, flattering, and promising little effort. And that is exactly where the next part of my story begins. It was in one of those sophisticated environments that he appeared for the first time. He did not enter as a threat, he entered as a constant presence. Always well-dressed, always smiling, always available. Someone who carried no responsibility on his shoulders. He had no companies to manage, no contracts to close, no decisions to make. He had time, appearance, and a rehearsed discourse. He was known in that social circle as someone well-connected. One of those men who live off image and connections. Nothing solid, everything superficial, but for many that seems enough. I watched him from a distance, without concern. He orbited the same events, the same parties, the same places. He seemed to know everyone, but not be truly close to anyone. Always ready to compliment, agree, and inflate egos, especially hers. I did not see danger, I saw irrelevance. I and my logic. Someone without construction did not compete with me. I had assets, history, and vision. He had momentary presence, and I underestimated the power of that. He said exactly what she wanted to hear. Not about the future but about the now. Not about responsibility but about freedom. He praised her beauty as if it were a rare discovery, exalted her presence as if she were the center of the room. While I talked about plans, he talked about sensations. While I built, he validated, and validation becomes addictive quickly. Especially for someone already emotionally distant. And I still did not perceive the real risk. She began to mention him in casual conversations, always in an innocent way, almost irrelevant. So-and-so commented this, so-and-so was there. Nothing that triggered direct suspicion. But repetition is never accidental. I noticed it but ignored it. Because trusting was always more comfortable than doubting. I did not want to seem controlling, nor insecure, even when something bothered me inside. He positioned himself as someone who admired our lifestyle. He asked questions, praised achievements, showed interest. But not in the work, the effort, the construction. He was interested in the shine, not the weight. I talked about business, he shifted to parties. I talked about strategy, he talked about experiences. It was always light, always easy, and tired people are drawn to what seems simple. Even when simple is empty, and that began to make sense to her. Little by little, he became a frequent presence. Always in the same places, always in the same circles. I was not bothered because I did not see a direct threat. He had nothing that I had. No real money, no power, no solid construction. But he had something I had lost without realizing it. Emotionally available time. Constant attention, attentive eyes and sweet words. And that weighs more than assets for someone who already feels bored. She began to get ready differently for certain events. She took longer, observed herself more, compared herself more. I noticed, but attributed it to natural vanity. After all, we lived in a visual environment. But there was a new intention there. Something subtle, almost invisible. It was not betrayal. It was preparation. And emotional preparation is the first step. Even when no one admits it. He never crossed boundaries in front of me. Always respectful, always cordial. The kind of person who knows exactly how far to go. But apparent respect does not mean clean intention. He positioned himself as a silent alternative. No confrontation, no direct dispute. Just available, and constant availability creates intimacy. Even when no one consciously realizes it, and that escaped me. I remained focused on my business, expanding companies, closing deals, increasing assets. I believed that strengthened us as a couple. That stability would bring emotional security, but too much security for some becomes boredom, and I was absent at the wrong moment. While I dealt with millions, someone else dealt with emotions, without effort, without responsibility, and that imbalance demands its price. When I realized he was already part of her daily life, it was too late to pretend it was coincidence. Something had settled there, not explicit, not declared, but present. And when a third person enters the emotional space of a couple, time begins to work against the one who built that. I did not know it yet, but I was about to discover that betrayals rarely begin in the body, they are born first in the mind. The betrayal did not begin in simple places, nor in obvious moments. It was born where everything looked too beautiful to raise suspicion. Brightly lit halls, low music, expensive glasses, and carefully calculated conversations. Environments where no one imagines something wrong, because there everything seems exclusive, clean, and sophisticated. But luxury also hides. It creates elegant curtains for ugly actions. And it was in that setting that everything began to distort, without noise, without apparent guilt. Just silent choices. The messages began innocently. Nothing explicit, nothing direct. Comments about events, typed laughter, subtle emojis. I did not see it, but I felt something change. She started smiling at her phone in a different way. Quick, hidden smiles, almost automatic. Conversations that stopped when I came closer. Nothing that could be accused, but everything that disturbed, the kind of sign you try to ignore. The meetings began disguised as social coincidences. Always in the same place, always at the same time. Luxury gyms, expensive cafes, private events. Environments where everyone runs into each other. Nothing seemed planned. But repetition is never accidental. I still trusted too much. I believed shared presence did not mean intention. But intention is built through habit, and the habit was already formed. She began to change the way she dressed for those moments. Nothing excessive, just strategic. Specific perfumes, different makeup, clothes chosen with more care, details I knew well, because I had lived with her long enough to notice subtle changes. I asked, she brushed it off, said it was just a desire to vary. I accepted it, because trusting seemed more noble than questioning, even when something screamed in silence. Business trips became perfect opportunities. Me away, her free, not financially free but emotionally unrestrained, and freedom without loyalty is fertile ground for mistakes. She knew my schedules, my time zones, my priorities. She knew when I would not be present, and he knew as well, because someone always tells, there are always cross conversations, there are always attentive observers. The meetings stopped being merely social, They became moments for two even without admitting it. Long conversations, confidences, comparisons. She talked about me without mentioning me. She spoke of absence, pressure, routine. He listened, agreed, validated. He never offered real solutions. Only temporary emotional comfort. And easy comfort creates dependency, even when it comes wrapped in falsehood. There was no clear moment when everything broke. It was a sequence of small permissions. Point one, extra message, a prolonged meeting, a touch that should not exist. And when they realized it, they were already beyond the line, without admitting it out loud, without facing the mirror. The betrayal did not ask for permission. It simply settled in, taking advantage of luxury, silence, and trust. Everything I provided. Meanwhile, I remained focused on contracts and growth. I made decisions that multiplied my assets. I believed I was strengthening our future. Without knowing the present was being betrayed. I trusted because I had always been worthy of trust. But dignity does not immunize anyone against others' choices. And the worst kind of betrayal is the one that grows close, without commotion, without drama, until it becomes too real to be ignored. I began to feel a distance I could not explain. She was there, but she was not. Short answers, cold touches, a distracted gaze. As if part of her was somewhere else. And it was in conversations I did not hear. In meetings I did not see. In emotions that no longer belonged to me. But I still had no proof, and without proof I kept trusting. The betrayal grew stronger because it felt safe. No apparent risk, no immediate cost. She had comfort with me, and emotion elsewhere. The worst possible scenario. Because when someone tries to live in two worlds at the same time, they always destroy one of them. And it usually begins with the one that seemed most solid. I did not know it yet, but I was about to discover everything. And when I did, nothing was ever the same again. Even without proof, my body began to feel what my mind still denied. It was an uncomfortable, persistent intuition. Hard to explain. I woke up with a weight on my chest that did not come from work. Something was out of place inside my own home. She was there, but too distant for someone who slept beside me. Hugs became quick, almost procedural. Her gaze no longer lingered on mine. And that hurt more than any financial loss. Because money I knew how to recover. Emotional connection, not always. I tried to be even more present. I reduced travel, delegated decisions, changed priorities. Things I had never done even in the most critical moments of my companies. I wanted to show her she mattered. That she was not just another commitment on my schedule. I started getting home earlier. Planning dinners, conversations, simple moments. But simplicity no longer enchanted her. She always seemed to be waiting for something more. Something I could not identify. Even feeling the coldness, I still loved her. I loved the idea of us, of the story we built. I loved who she was in the beginning. And, above all, who I believed she still was. Love has that trap. It makes us fight for versions that no longer exist. I clung to the good memories, ignored the current signs, because accepting the change meant facing the loss, and I was not ready for that yet. She began to get irritated over small things. Simple questions turned into silent arguments. My care started to be seen as control. My presence, as intrusion. It was as if everything about me bothered her. Even when I did nothing. I walked carefully inside my own home. Choosing words, avoiding topics. Trying not to provoke cold reactions. This was not partnership, it was disguised tension. I tried to talk, but there was never real space. She said she was tired, distracted, busy. There was always a reason to postpone the conversation. And postponed conversations create invisible walls. I talked about feelings. She changed the subject. I talked about the future. She answered with silence. I felt like I was talking to myself. But I insisted, because I still believed. I believed love withstands difficult phases. Even when only one person fights. At night, even sharing the same bed, there was distance. Bodies close, minds far away. I missed spontaneous touch, the conversation before sleeping, the feeling of true intimacy. She always seemed to be somewhere else. The phone became a constant companion, and I felt like an intruder in that space. That wounded my pride. But it wounded my heart even more. Despite everything, I did not directly suspect betrayal. Perhaps out of emotional arrogance. Perhaps because I believed no one would risk losing all of that. I thought comfort, security, and status held any relationship together. But people are not contracts. They break without prior notice. Even when everything seems favorable. I kept loving. And loving sometimes makes us blind. Blind to the obvious. I caught myself trying to please her like in the beginning. Repeating gestures, words, promises. As if I could rewind time. But you cannot win back someone who has already left emotionally. Her presence was physical. But her interest already had a new address. I felt that, even without understanding it was a feeling of silent replacement. As if I were being slowly exchanged without warning, without explanation. Even hurt, I did not confront her, that I did not want to accuse without certainty, that I did not want to seem weak, that I did not want to create an irreversible conflict, that I chose to wait. Wait for something to change, wait for her to come back. Wait for love to be enough. But waiting too long is also a choice, and that choice has its price. While I insisted, something inside me began to close, not out of anger but out of where each silent rejection weakened something, that I still loved her. But I no longer felt loved. And when love becomes one-sided, that it starts to hurt differently. Not like an explosion, but like slow erosion, and that where would soon lead me to the truth. The truth did not arrive as a scandal, it arrived as something out of place, that a detail too small to be ignored, that a time that did not add up, an explanation too vague for someone who had always been precise. My instinct, trained in business, went on alert, that I learned early that when something does not add up, there is hidden risk. And in that moment, it was not a contract, that it was my marriage, that I did not confront, I observed. Because important decisions require data. I began paying attention to patterns. Mood changes, altered routines, calculated responses. Nothing emotional, everything technical, like a CEO analyzing a possible internal fraud. That I did not want to be right. But I started gathering information in silence. Because the worst thing someone can do is act without clarity, that I needed to understand the full scenario. Even if it hurt me. Even if it hurt more than I imagined. The messages were not blatant, there were no obvious declarations. But there was too much intimacy for what was said to be just friendship. Long, frequent conversations out of context. Times that made no sense. Subtle nicknames, too much laughter, that I read without really reading. Because every word seemed to weigh tons, that it was not imagination, that it was reality forming in front of me. I noticed how she hid her phone around me, how she went into another room to reply, how she smiled before turning off the screen. Small gestures betray more than big mistakes, that I did not need to invade anything. Everything was there, visible to anyone willing to see. Trust had already been broken. Even before full confirmation. And that changes everything inside a man, especially one who has always trusted. His name appeared more often than it should have. Always disguised, always casual. But repetition is evidence that I connected the dots with cold precision. Dates, places, events. Everything began to make sense, not like drama, but like a cruel report. Each piece of information confirmed what I feared, and what I had felt for a long time. Strangely, I did not feel immediate anger, that I felt silence inside, that a strange calm, almost clinical, that as if something had finally been explained. Doubt was more exhausting than truth. And now I had the truth, that I did not need shouting, that I did not need confrontation at that moment, that I needed to decide. And decisions change destinies. I continued acting normally, that I talked, smiled, maintained the routine. She noticed nothing. Because those who betray believe they control the situation. But control is an illusion when the other already knows. That I began to see her differently. Every gesture took on another meaning. Every word sounded empty. Not out of hatred, but out of clarity. The nights became quieter, that I slept less, thought more. Not about revenge but about emotional strategy, that I needed to protect what was left of me. And, above all, what I had built. Company's image, assets, that I would not allow an emotional mistake to destroy years of discipline, that I had already lost trust. But I would not lose control. No. The pain came in controlled waves. Not like an explosion but like a constant weight, that I felt it but I did not show it. Because at that moment, feeling too much would interfere, that I needed to be rational. Even with a wounded heart, that I understood that it was a point of no return. Something had broken definitively, and I could no longer pretend, but it was still not time to act. From that moment on, something changed inside me, that it was not anger, it was exhaustion, that a deep exhaustion from trying to hold something together alone, that I realized I was fighting for a story that already had another author. And when you realize that something ends, even if no one knows yet, that I had not said anything, but the decision was beginning to form. Silent, firm, inevitable. And it would completely change the course of my life. There was a silent moment when something inside me finally broke, that it was not anger, it was not hatred. It was not an explosion, that it was accumulated exhaustion, heavy and definitive. Exhaustion from insisting alone, from justifying the unjustifiable, that I understood that love is not begged for. That respect is not negotiated. That loyalty is not born from convenience, that in that moment, for the first time I thought about myself. Not as an entrepreneur but as a man, and that changed everything. I looked at my own journey with different eyes, that I saw everything I had built from an early age. The sleepless nights, the solitary decisions, the calculated risks. The wealth that grew through discipline and focus. The power that came from work, not from appearance. And I asked myself why I accepted so little emotionally. Why I tolerated coldness, distance, and disdain that I realized I was betraying myself. Maintaining something that no longer honored me, and that realization hurt more than her betrayal. I understood that money does not buy loyalty. Neither mansions, nor cars, nor trips. They only reveal who a person is when they have everything. And her answer was clear. She chose cheap emotion instead of solid construction. She chose easy validation instead of real partnership. That I could not change that. But I could change my position in this story. That I could leave the role of the one who insists, and assume the role of the one who decides. I began to observe everything with emotional distance. Every gesture, every word, every absence, without expectation, without hope, without illusion. That I stopped trying to fix what did not want to be fixed. That I stopped competing with someone who had nothing to lose. Because I had everything to lose if I stayed there. My balance, my self-esteem, my clarity. That I realized that staying was also a choice. And a choice that cost me dearly, more costly than any separation. The idea of ending the marriage began to take shape. Not as a threat, but as liberation. That I no longer thought about saving something. That I thought about preserving who I was. Because when you lose respect for yourself, no relationship survives. That I understood that love cannot be one-sided. That partnership does not survive lies. And that silence is not peace, it is disguised resignation. That I was ready to stop pretending. Curiously, when I made that internal decision, I felt relief. Not joy but clarity, like when a bad business deal is ended before causing greater loss. That I knew there would be pain. But pain with dignity is different from silent humiliation. That I did not want a scandal. That I did not want shouting or accusations. That I wanted a clean closure. Because everything I built was with class, and the end would be the same. I began to organize my life in silence. Documents, routines, priorities, not as someone running away, but as someone preparing. That I thought about impact, consequences, timing. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. That I owed no explanations to someone who had already broken the pact. That I owed only coherence to myself. And that strengthened me from within. She still did not notice anything. Because those who betray usually feel in control. They believe the other is emotionally trapped, that they will not have the courage to leave. That I maintain my usual posture. Calm, polite, distant. No accusations, no arguments. That I watched how comfortable she felt in that position. Without imagining that the game had turned, and that I was no longer there emotionally. The hardest part was accepting that I could not save her. Not even save her from herself. Some choices need to be lived through to the end. Some consequences cannot be avoided. That I had to accept that. Accept that love also means limits. That saying enough is an act of courage, and that staying there would diminish me. That I was ready to leave. Even though no one knew yet. At that point, the marriage had already ended inside me. All that remained was for the outside world to catch up, and that would happen soon. Because internal decisions always materialized. That I was not planning drama. That I was planning closure. She still believed everything was under control. That I would remain there, insisting, trying. But I had already chosen. And when a man chooses himself, nothing remains the same. When I decided to speak, there was no explosion and no accusation. My voice came out calm, controlled, almost distant. That I did not need to prove anything. That I already knew everything. She immediately realized something was different. That it was not a threat. It was not an argument. That it was an ending. That I said I would not continue in that marriage, without dramatizing, without over-explaining. And that silence was louder than any scream. She reacted with genuine surprise, not because she deeply loved me at that moment, but because she did not expect me to have the courage to leave. She believed I would insist, that I would try one more time, that I would forgive in silence. Her sense of security came from my predictability, and I broke that. When someone loses control of the situation, shock comes before guilt. She tried to turn the conversation around, said I was exaggerating, that everything was just confusion, that I was too distant because of work. She shifted the responsibility onto me. That it was a predictable defense. That I listened to everything without reacting. Because someone who has decided to leave does not need to convince. The decision is already made, and that disarms any argument. I made it clear there was no room for negotiation. That I did not ask for explanations. That I did not ask for confessions. That I did not want details. Some truths do not need to be spoken out loud. They are already explicit in behavior. That I simply said I no longer trusted her. And without trust, there is no marriage. No matter the level of luxury around it. Nothing sustains a relationship that is broken on the inside. She tried to change her tone. She went from defense to pleading, said it was just a phase, that everything could go back to how it was before. But before no longer existed. That I did not want past versions. That I wanted present truth, and that was something she did not have to offer. When someone realizes they have lost power, they try to recover what they already let fall. The separation was quick and clean. That I did not argue over assets, I did not argue over status. Everything I had built was protected. That I had always been strategic. Even in love, she realized in that moment that she would lose more than a husband. She would lose access to the empire.to, the strong last name.to, the life that placed her on another social level, and that began to hurt. She left believing I would go back on my decision, that it was just a crisis, that I would miss her, that I would give in. She underestimated the exhaustion of someone who tried alone for too long. She underestimated the clarity of someone who respects himself. That I did not block her, I did not humiliate her. That I simply moved on, and that was what destabilized her the most, because indifference is powerful. In the days that followed, I felt a different kind of silence, not empty but light. The house felt bigger, the air felt cleaner. Even with the pain present, there was peace. That I no longer had to walk on eggshells, that I no longer had to compete with ghosts, that I was alone, but whole. And that has no price. That it was there that something began to change in me. She began to notice the practical consequences. Invitations became fewer. Messages stopped. The luxury routine began to fail, because that life was not hers. That it was ours, sustained by me, and when access was cut off, the scenery changed quickly. That I observed everything from a distance, without satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Meanwhile, I turned my focus completely toward myself. Work, health, vision. That I channeled everything I had been holding back emotionally into real growth. That I did not want to prove anything to her. I wanted to prove it to myself. That I could go through all of that without breaking. And the more I moved forward, the clearer it became that the separation did not weaken me. That it repositioned me. She still believed that story was not over, that there would be a reconciliation, that time would make me give in. But what she did not understand is that when a man leaves in silence, that he has already stayed too long. That I was just beginning a new phase. Colder, more focused, more ambitious. And that phase would transform everything, including the way she would see me afterward. After the separation, something inside me reorganized itself with rare clarity. That I had always been disciplined, but now there was absolute focus. No emotional noise, no silent exhaustion. All the energy I spent trying to sustain an empty relationship returned to me, and when that happens, growth accelerates. I dove into work with surgical precision. New ideas quickly took shape. Projects that had been shelved began to move forward. Money started flowing again with greater intensity. As if the universe had cleared the path. The companies grew at a pace even I found aggressive. International expansions, strategic acquisitions, larger contracts. I negotiated calmly, but with renewed ambition. There was no longer emotional distraction. Every decision was made with a cool head. I knew exactly what I wanted to build now. Solid assets, a strong image, and total freedom. The empire began expanding beyond what I had previously planned. And this time, it was mine alone, with no emotional concessions. My routine changed completely. Early workouts, regulated nutrition, a sharp mind. I needed to be strong inside and out. Because real power begins with self-control. Travel continued, but with a different purpose. Not to please anyone but to conquer space. Even more exclusive hotels, even more strategic meetings. I entered places with a different posture. There was no rush, no insecurity. I knew exactly who I was. The cars became rarer, more powerful, more symbolic. Not as empty ostentation, but as a reflection of a phase of personal dominance. The new mansion was bigger, quieter, more mine. Spaces designed for performance and peace. Nothing there carried old memories. It was clean territory. Built for someone who no longer accepted emotional scraps. I felt proud walking through the door. Because every detail represented overcoming. Socially, my position strengthened. People began to look at me differently. Not as the promising young CEO, but as someone who had been through fire and did not burn. That commands respect. More selective invitations, tighter circles. I chose where to go and whom to talk to. There was no need to prove anything. Those who understand power recognize confident silence, and I spoke little. Curiously, the more I grew, the less I thought about her. Not out of resentment but real detachment. She stopped being an emotional reference. She became just part of a closed chapter. I was too busy building the next level. When you truly grow, the past loses its voice. I felt that every day. The lightness of no longer carrying others' expectations. I was responsible only for myself. And that is liberating. New opportunities began to arise naturally. Partnerships, invitations, high-level connections. People who once only observed now approached. Not because of drama, but because of results. I was on another financial level, another mental level, another emotional level, and that changes everything. Because real power makes no noise. It simply asserts itself. I also changed the way I related to people. More selective, more attentive, less available. I learned that access is a privilege. Not everyone deserves to enter your world. I observed actions, not words. Consistency, not promises. That saved me time and where I was not close to love, but I was shielded against illusions, and that gave me control. While I was rising, she was beginning to fall. I did not need to follow closely to know. The elite world is small, news travels fast. Changes in behavior, absence at events. Invitations that no longer arrived. I did not feel pleasure in that. I felt confirmation. Confirmation that my decision was right, and that every choice has its price. I moved forward with a calmness that startled those who knew me. There was no rush, no need to display victory. I was winning in silence. Building something even greater than before, and the more I advanced, the more emotionally distant I became from her. There was no room for return, because real growth changes identity, and I was no longer the same man that was preparing the ground for what would come next. While I was moving forward, reality began to catch up with her forcefully. The man she chose only seemed brilliant under artificial light. Without my empire nearby, the scenery changed far too quickly. The promises he made were not backed by action. The seductive speech could not sustain a real routine. There was no stability, no plans, no future. Little by little, she realized she had traded construction for illusion. But realizing does not mean being able to go back. Some choices close doors silently, and hers began to close at that moment. Her standard of living dropped abruptly. Expensive hotels became memories. Exclusive restaurants gave way to ordinary outings. International trips disappeared from the calendar. Luxury, which once seemed natural, turned into nostalgia. She began to miss things she once despised. Comfort, security, predictability, things that are only valued once they are lost. And emptiness began to settle in. An emptiness no appearance can fill. The lover revealed who he truly was off the social stage. No real money, no power, no direction. Living off moments, not projects. She realized she was beside someone without a foundation, without structured ambition, without discipline, without the ability to offer anything beyond temporary attention. The fantasy began to collapse, and ruins always reveal the truth, even when no one wants to look. Socially, she began to disappear. Invitations stopped arriving. Events where she had once been a guaranteed presence went on without her. The elite circle is selective and pragmatic. It draws close to power and distances itself from decline. Without my last name, without my empire, she ceased to be a priority, and that hit her ego directly, because for those who live on status, being forgotten hurts more than being rejected. She tried to maintain the image for a while. Expensive clothes kept as reminders, carefully calculated posts to appear well. But reality always leaks through. The lack of resources begins to show in the details. In the pace, in the choices, in the absences. Maintaining appearances without a foundation is exhausting, and it exhausts quickly. The false shine began to lose strength, and loneliness began to speak louder. The relationship that once seemed exciting became a burden. No money, no growth, no perspective. Conversations became repetitive, promises empty. She began to compare, and comparison is cruel when reality is inferior. She remembered everything she had with me, and how she had despised it. Regret began to take shape there, even if it was still silent. She realized she had lost more than a marriage. She lost stability, protection, and social respect. She lost access to a world few enter, and one she had already considered guaranteed. But nothing is guaranteed once trust is broken. I built everything with discipline, and she abandoned everything on impulse. That difference became impossible to ignore, and reality began to sink in, even if far too late. Difficulties began to pile up. Small problems that had never existed before. Bills, limitations, frustrations, things she never had to face with me. Real life began to demand presence. And the man beside her had no answers. No solutions. No emotional structure. She was alone, even accompanied, and that weighs heavily. The lover's shine faded quickly. No money, no status, no stage. She saw that he needed her more than she needed him, and that completely changes the dynamic. Charm turned into frustration. Attraction turned into demands, and regret grew stronger, because she knew exactly where she had gone wrong, and with whom she had lost everything. But some losses cannot be recovered. Meanwhile, I remained distant, without looking back, without curiosity, without any desire to follow the fall. I was far too busy living my rise. And that, by itself, was consequence enough. She began to understand there was no plan B. That the choice was definitive, and that the next step would be trying to return, even if her pride was in pieces. Her first contact after everything did not come with courage, it came with caution. A short, neutral message, almost professional. As if she were testing the ground. As if she still believed there was some space left. I read it and did not respond immediately. Not as an emotional game, but because I no longer reacted on impulse. She seemed to measure every word, afraid of making another mistake. And that fear said a lot. The messages began to come more frequently, always loaded with nostalgia. Memories of who we were, what we lived, what we built. She talked about trips, moments, achievements. She never spoke directly about the mistake. As if she could skip that part. As if the past could be edited. I observed in silence. Because someone who truly regrets begins by assuming guilt, and that was still not complete remorse. Then came the phone calls. Some hung up before connecting. Others ignored by me, not out of revenge, but because I was no longer emotionally available. She wanted to talk. I already understood everything. Conversations would not rebuild trust. They would only prolong the wear, and I no longer had the energy for that. When she finally spoke openly, her voice was different. Less confident, less firm, less proud. She said she had made a mistake, that she had been carried away by illusion, that she had confused emotion with value, that now she saw everything clearly. I listened politely, without interrupting, without reacting. Because regret does not require an immediate response. It requires consequence. She tried to explain what she felt. She spoke of emptiness, of need, of confusion. She tried to justify without fully taking responsibility. I realized then that she regretted the loss. Not necessarily the betrayal. She missed the life, the comfort, the security, the status that came with me, and that was far too clear to ignore. She asked for a chance, said she would do things differently, that she had learned, that now she valued what she had with me. But learning that comes after loss does not rebuild what was broken. I did not see transformation. I saw desperation. And desperation does not sustain a new beginning. It only tries to erase consequences. I knew that. And that kept me firm. She tried to get close physically, suggested casual meetings. She wanted to see me, to talk in person. I declined politely. Because I did not want to confuse empathy with openness. I no longer felt attraction. There was no curiosity. The emotional cycle was closed. And forcing closeness would be dishonest with myself. I had learned to respect myself. Her tone began to change. From regret it moved to guilt, from guilt to fear. She began to realize that I would not return, that there was no negotiation. That time was not on her side, and that generated anxiety. When someone realizes they have lost definitive access, desperation appears, even if it comes far too late. She started following my life from a distance. She knew about my achievements, my progress. She saw images, heard comments, felt the difference. And that hit her hard, because she compared the present with what she had before, and the comparison was always cruel. I did not need to show anything. My evolution spoke for itself. And that reinforced her regret, day after day. The most curious thing is that, at that point, I felt no anger. I felt neutrality. She no longer occupied emotional space. I did not wish her harm. But I also did not wish closeness. Love had turned into learning, and learning does not ask for return. It asks for closure. I knew that her request was not the end. There would still be one final meeting, and that meeting would seal everything. When I agreed to see her again, it was not out of longing. It was for closure. I needed to end that cycle by looking her in the eyes. I chose a place that was neutral for me, but symbolic for her. An elegant, quiet, sophisticated setting. Nothing extravagant, nothing emotional. I arrived exactly on time. Impeccable suit, calm posture, clear mind. I was not there to argue. I was there to finalize. She arrived different from how I remembered her. Not physically but energetically. The glow was gone. Her walk was more restrained. Her eyes carried anxiety and expectation. She tried to smile, but the smile did not hold. I greeted her politely. No aggressive coldness. No intimacy. Just distant respect. We sat across from each other. The initial silence was heavy. She began to speak too quickly. Like someone afraid of losing the chance. She spoke of regret, of mistakes, of confusion. She said she now understood everything, that she had matured, that she was no longer the same person. I listened attentively, but without emotion. While she spoke, I observed details. Nervous gestures, restless hands, accelerated breathing. Clear signs of someone who had lost control of their own narrative. I, on the other hand, was serene. No rush, no anxiety. I no longer needed that moment. She did, and that completely changes the dynamic. Because the one who needs loses power, and the one who is at peace controls the situation. When she finished, there was silence again. She was expecting something. A reaction, an opening, any sign. I kept my gaze steady, and replied with few words. I said I understood the regret. But that regret does not erase choices, that late maturity does not rebuild trust. That some doors, once closed, close forever, and this was one of them. She tried to argue. She said everyone makes mistakes. that relationships go through crises, that we could try again. I interrupted calmly, not to impose, but to end it. I explained that I felt nothing anymore, neither anger nor pain nor desire, that the bond had broken definitively, and that insisting would only prolong her suffering. The hardest moment was when she realized the truth, not because of what I said, but because of what I did not feel. She understood there was no return, that it was not a tactic, that it was not wounded pride, that it was real detachment. She tried to hold back tears, but failed, and there, everything became clear. She asked if I had someone. I answered that it did not matter, because the decision had nothing to do with another person. It had to do with me, with what I learned, with what I would no longer accept. She lowered her head, and in that gesture there was recognition, not only of the loss, but of the mistake. I stood up calmly, paid the bill, thanked her for the conversation, wished that she would find what she was looking for without irony, without contempt, but without closeness. I did not touch her, I did not hug her, I did not promise anything, because clean goodbyes hurt less in the long run. As I left, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Complete lightness. No emotional loose ends. No doubts. No ghosts. I knew that meeting had closed everything. For me, definitively. For her, perhaps as the beginning of acceptance. But that was no longer my problem. I was ready to move on. As I walked out, the contrast was evident. I was stronger, more centered, more whole. She remained seated, smaller, silent. Not out of humiliation, but out of consequence. I did not need to defeat anyone. Life did that on its own. And the next chapter of my story was not about her. It was about what comes next. And that was called definitive power. After that meeting, my life moved in an even clearer direction. There was no more emotional noise, no internal loose ends. I woke up with focus and went to sleep with peace. The empire I had built kept growing. New companies, new markets, new numbers. Money began circulating again with strength and intelligence. Everything worked the way it was supposed to, without emotional sabotage, without internal distractions. Life was finally aligned with me. I realized that true power is not about defeating someone. It is about no longer needing that victory. I did not need to prove I was better. I simply was. That reflected in my posture, my decisions, the way I spoke less. Those who understand real wealth recognize it from afar. I became more selective, more reserved. Not out of coldness, but maturity. I learned that access is a privilege. And not everyone deserves it. Meanwhile, she continued with her own reality, without luxury, without protection, without status. Trying to rebuild something on unstable ground. I did not follow it, I did not seek to know. Because karma does not need an audience. It acts at the right time, in the right way. She lived the consequences of the choices she made, not as divine punishment, but as a logical result. Life simply balanced the scale. The man she chose disappeared from the scene, like almost everything born from appearance, without consistency, without continuity, without legacy. I never needed to compare him to me. The comparison happened on its own. Between those who build and those who promise. Between those who sustain and those who take advantage. Between those who think long-term and those who live for the moment. That difference defines destinies. And defines endings. I learned that loyalty is a rare asset. Rarer than money, rarer than status, rarer than beauty. And those who trade it for cheap emotion lose everything, not all at once, but slowly, silently, until they realize there is no return. I lost nothing. I freed myself. Today when I look back, I feel no resentment. I feel learning. I understand that story needed to happen. So that I could become who I am now, stronger, clearer, more whole, the young CEO who succeeded early, matured, not only in business, but in emotional choices, and that has no price. That is real wealth. Luxury continues to be part of my life. Mansions, cars, travel, everything remains present. But now with a different meaning, not as a showcase, but as a consequence of internal alignment. I know exactly what I want to build from now on. And, most importantly, with whom. I do not accept less than reciprocity. I do not negotiate respect. And I do not return to what diminished me. Her silence after that meeting said everything. There were no more messages, there were no more attempts. She understood, and that, in a way, was a relief for both of us. Each followed the path they chose. Mine was growth, hers late learning. Life does not make mistakes. It simply responds. Today I remain surrounded by opportunities, new people, new environments, real possibilities, but none of that defines me more than peace. I learn to recognize signs early. To leave when I am not valued. To choose myself without guilt. Because no one builds an external empire if they are in ruins inside. I rebuilt everything, and I did it the right way. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple. Those who trade loyalty for appearance almost always lose everything. It may seem like an advantage at first, But the price comes that it always comes that I did not need to seek revenge, that I simply moved on, and that was enough. Because in the end, the one who laughs last laughs best. In the end, I understood that losing someone is not the same as losing everything. Sometimes, losing someone is exactly what saves you. I did not lose a marriage. I freed myself from an illusion. While I rebuilt my life, my empire, and my peace, she had to live with the weight of her own choices. Not as punishment, but as consequence, because life does not punish, it simply responds. I moved forward stronger, wealthier, and more aware of my value. She moved forward with the regret of having traded loyalty for appearance. And that is something no amount of money can buy back. Now I ask you, would you forgive a betrayal like this? Do you believe loyalty is worth more than status? Or do you think some people only learn when they lose everything? If this story made you reflect, leave your comment below. I read them all. And if you like intense stories about betrayal, luxury, power, karma, and twists no one expects, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here, every story proves one thing. Those who choose appearance lose everything, and those who choose themselves win in the end.